I've been a psychotherapist for 20 years. I've seen things you can't imagine.
If you want to know something about yourself, sit on your bed one night and say, what's one thing I'm doing wrong?
Make a plan. Look at what you're interested in. Get disciplined about something.
Jordan Peterson is quite the intellect. I've listened to his lectures as well as his short YouTube videos and so forth. We all can learn a lot from anybody. You might want to listen to his 10 rules to greatness.
Tell your kid, here's an impossible thing. Why don't you go out and fail? You say, here's something worth going after. Here's a step you could take that would push you beyond where you are, but that you also have a reasonably high probability of succeeding at, right? They call that
within a time frame.
Within some time frame. That's the other thing. You have to parameterize it with regards to time frame. That's right, and that puts you in the zone of proximal development, and that's a concept that was generated by a guy named Vygotsky. He was a Russian developmental psychologist and a smart one. It's where the idea of the zone comes from, to be in the zone.
Yes.
And when you're in the zone, you're expanding your skills in a manner that's intrinsically rewarding because you're succeeding. And so you want to set, if you're good to yourself, you think, okay, I need to set a goal, but I need to set a goal that someone as stupid and useless as me could probably attain if they put some effort into it.
Right.
And then you've got it perfectly, because it's not so high that it's grandiose or impossible that you fail necessarily and then justify your bitterness. It's like, well, I could do well, because that happens to people.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, it's like,
See this all the time.
You know, yes, exactly. Well, I set a goal and I didn't attain it, so I'm not going to set any more goals.
Right.
It's like, no, you set a goal that was inappropriate.
For the time frame. Yeah.
That's right. You didn't calibrate it properly.
Yeah.
And you're playing a trick on yourself because you wanted to fail so that you could justify not having to try.
And being a victim. Yeah.
Which isn't helpful. You're still going to be a victim. It's like, there's no way out of that, man. Yeah. So, because life is a challenge that in some sense can't be surmounted. So there's no way out of your problem. But there are certainly proper ways of dealing with it. One of the things I tell young people all the time, I'm not a very typical psychologist in this regard, because psychologists like to pat people on the head and say, you're all right the way you are. I talked to Bishop Barron a while ago. I'm going to broadcast this, and he said that the Catholic priests were trained in the 1960s to kind of be accepting, humanistically. You're okay the way you are, And that's such rubbish. It's like, not only are you not okay the way you are, you don't think that anybody else is okay the way they are either. And you don't think your children are okay the way they are. Like, you love them and all that, but you don't want them to stay 3 years old their entire life. You want them to expand and improve and become who they are. And so, instead of telling young people that they're okay the way they are, I tell them that, and it's a terrible message for them if they're desperate. So let's say 10% of the people in my audience are young, maybe they're young men, just for the sake of argument. And they're like not in good shape. They don't have any goals. They're drinking too much. They're watching pornography all the time. They've got no aim. They've got no structure in their life. And they're just bloody miserable. And the misery is twisting them into malevolence, because enough misery will absolutely do that to you. And then what are you going to do? And come along and say, well, you're okay the way you are? It's like, that's the last thing they want to hear. It's like, get your damn act together.
Make a plan. Look at what you're interested in. Get disciplined about something. Allow for the possibility that you have something important to contribute to the world, and that the world would be a lesser place without that contribution. Don't be afraid of taking on responsibility. It's where you find what sustains you in your life. You can take on too much responsibility. You have to be cautious in that regard, but that's a less common problem than not taking on enough. A lot of the things that people regard as traps are actually the means to their life. Often young people are afraid of commitment. There's nothing good about it. People who don't grow up don't find the sort of meaning in their life that sustains them through difficult times, and they're certain to encounter difficult times. And they're left bitter and resentful and without purpose and adrift and hostile and resentful and vengeful and arrogant and deceitful and of no use to themselves and of no use to anyone else and no partner for a woman, and there's nothing in it that's good. Don't say things you don't mean, and don't go along with things you don't agree with. I told my kids when they went to school, look, kids, follow the rules, but don't follow stupid rules. Who decides if they're stupid? Well, that's a hard question, because most of the time you should follow the rules. But now and then the rules get pathological, and you have to stand up. I said, if you're going to stand up and break a rule, think about it, and you have to be willing to take the consequences. But there's consequences to not standing up to stupid rules too. And if you think that those consequences are lesser, then you suffer from the delusion that there's an easy path through life. You're going to have to put some effort into your life, and you need to be motivated to do that. And so what are the potential sources of motivation? Well, you could think about them in the big five manner. You know, if you're extroverted, you want friends. If you're agreeable, you want an intimate relationship. If you're disagreeable, you want to win competitions. If you're open, you want to engage in creative activity. If you're high in neuroticism, you want security. Okay, so those are all sources of potential motivation that you could draw on, that you could tailor to your own, your own personality. Look, if you do your job very competently, you might expect that your boss should notice that, and probably he or she should. But the problem with doing things well is that it's invisible. What's visible is mistakes. So then you just work really hard and you're invisible. It's like, well, you're invisible. That's not helpful. And like, did you ask? And maybe asking isn't good enough. Like, I've counseled lots of people who've tripled their salaries in 2 or 3 years. Like, it's work, man, it's work. It's a strategy, it's a war to do that. But you can do it.
You write in the book, there is no faith and no courage and no sacrifice in doing what is expedient. What do you say to those viewers that don't pursue their dreams and are locked in their careers because they are too afraid to take risks and pursue something meaningful?
Well, you should be afraid of taking risks and pursuing something meaningful. But you should be more afraid of staying where you are if it's making you miserable, paying a price by sitting there being miserable. You might say, well, the devil I know is better than the one I don't. It's like, don't be so sure of that. The clock is ticking. Yeah, and if you're miserable in your job now and you change nothing, in 5 years, you'll be much more miserable and you'll be a lot older. One of the things I've been suggesting to my audiences, it's one of the rules in my book, is that well, you should tell the truth, or at least you shouldn't lie. It's like, you can't tell the truth because what the hell do you know? But you cannot lie. You know, like each of us knows when we're about to utter something that isn't true. Now, sometimes maybe you're confused about it because you're ignorant and you're biased, and so you say something and it might be true and it might not be, but you're not clear about it. But sometimes it's pretty damn clear that you say something or you do something that you know perfectly well not to be true, and you do it anyways. And the proposition that Genesis puts forward is, if you act in truth, then the order you produce is good, regardless of how it appears. It's an axiomatic statement of it's an axiomatic ethical proposition that the job of whatever extracts order from chaos is properly done if it's done in truth. You let go of what you want, and you replace it with a hypothesis. It's the hypothesis of faith. And the hypothesis is, it doesn't matter what I want, because I don't know even what I should want. Instead, I can say, I'm going to make a claim, and a philosophical claim, that if I tell the truth as carefully as I can, then whatever happens is the best that could have possibly happened in that situation, no matter how it looks. I've been stressing this idea of personal responsibility. It's like, well, personal responsibility is to compete with yourself, is to be slightly better than yourself the next day. And it better in some way that you can actually manage, and that's humility. Like, well, I'm a flawed person, I've got all my problems. Could I be as good as person X? It's like not the right question. The right question is, could you be slightly better tomorrow than your currently flawed self? And the answer to that is, if you have enough humility to set the bar properly low, then you could be better tomorrow than you are today.
You've just listened to his top 10 rules for greatness. Learn from great people and what they do to achieve their level of success, and start adapting some of these things to your life. Leave a comment below on which rules resonate with you most and which one you're going to start implementing in your life this year.